So welcome everybody I think I'm one of the last sessions here at Teams Fest. I think there might be one more after us here in the meetings and callings channel here, but really want to thank you guys for, and everybody here for attending this session of what's at the center of your voice deployment. I am Adam Ball. I'll put my contact info up there for you and how you can get a hold of me and everything, but I am based actually out of the Denver, Colorado area. So I am just getting my day started. So have plenty of coffee, as many of you are probably getting ready to end your day. So hopefully it's been a fantastic day for you here at Teams Fest, and looking forward to what we can chat about here within what's at the center of your voice deployment. So as I was kind of plotting this through and thinking about what we're going to talk about here today, a lot of this comes through many of the conversations that I have day in and day out as a consultant. So I speak to lots of organizations as they start to think about how do we move from where we're at to how do we get to Microsoft Teams, and we'll talk a little bit through that today. But I saw this picture and I just thought this is kind of very typical of how I see many voice deployments as we get into them. We see a lot of things where a lot of times where voice deployments come through and you got different wires going to different spots. And if you ask somebody for a map of your voice deployment, there's squiggly lines all over the place. And it really just kind of sets the tone of, okay, how do we get this? How do we make this happen? So what I want to do is we're going to talk through where people are coming from a voice deployment standpoint. What might that look like? And then we're going to go into what's the solution, and then specifically why I believe 5 reasons why I believe what the solution is the proper solution. And we'll keep recapping that through here as we go through this presentation today. And just really quickly, feel free to ask questions. I am going to leave about 5 or 10 minutes at the very end of the session to ask questions, so we can queue those up for the end and everything, but we'll be able to answer questions in the chat as we go along as well. So the starting point, let's just kind of talk through, and this is a gross oversimplification, but it helps us with just kind of getting everything set up. For many people, when I talk to them, this is the ultimate model that they have. They have their carrier, they have some sort of connection from their carrier. I've actually been seeing a lot of customers lately who are finally just kind of saying, all right, we need to make a change, and they're still on a PRI, whether that's a T1 and E1, something of that nature, some sort of ISDN circuit that connects to a voice gateway that sits out in front of their PBX. This is very, very common to see, and like I said, it's an oversimplification for larger organizations. But there are so many smaller organizations. You might be 1,000 seats and less, and this probably describes however you're looking in a very common manner. As we kind of go on, what this might look like for a larger organization is you might have multiple voice gateways, you might have multiple PBXs, you might have, let's say you're on a Cisco shop, you might have multiple call manager clusters spread around the world, and where you have different carriers even happening. So from the standpoint of, let me get my laser pointer here, from the carrier, you might have not just one carrier, you might have 6, 7, 8 carriers from around the world. You might have multiple voice gateways that are either using PRI or even just SIP. You might have SIP coming into an SBC somewhere instead of a voice gateway. But ultimately, they all come back to the PBX, and then you have your users hanging off that PBX. And in addition, you might have interconnects between these PBX clusters. So for example, you might have, if you have a VIA CM or Cisco Call Manager, you could have interconnects between these PBXs. And as you kind of look at this, you might sit down and go, okay, well, how do I integrate Teams into this? And we're just going to recap that for a minute before we move on, because I think it's really important to just kind of have that understanding of what are we doing. I know there were some direct routing sessions earlier, so just really quickly, we'll recap this. I need to keep the coffee flowing here. So with direct routing, many people have probably seen this slide before, where we have our PSTN carrier. We're going to come into the certified session border controller, and then from that certified session border controller, we're going to go across the internet over to Microsoft Phone System for Teams. And our Teams user is sitting over here, and they're happy because they've got this great connection. We have our third-party PBX that can connect over to the SBC, and that might be our Cisco, our Avaya, Mitel, ShoreTel, what have you. One thing to note on this is you do need to make sure that you do have a certified session border controller. That list keeps getting longer and longer. Up front, it was AnyNode and audio codes and ribbon, just alphabetical order there real quickly, as well as you have Oracle, even Cisco and Avaya have gotten certified lately. One thing to just double check is always go out to the Microsoft Docs and verify that this session border controller that you're looking to use is actually certified, what it's certified for, and this is really key. Microsoft will actually tell you what it's certified for, and when I say that, it's things like, is it certified for emergency services, dynamic emergency services, whether that be through third party or something like ELIN, things like that. So just make sure that you're certified, or even media bypass, because you want to make sure it's going to meet your needs. And we'll kind of talk through this a little bit more as we kind of keep going along. So when we take this and we kind of keep this mindset of this is what we're looking to do, what happens very frequently for customers is they end up in this situation. This is actually what it really looks like for many people, and it's the root cause of many people's problems as they lean forward. So, you know, we had our carrier, we had our PRI, we had our voice gateway into the PBX, and many people, what they do is they throw their certified session border controller in here, and they hang it off the back end of the PBX, and it's real easy terms. We call this back ending because it's coming off the backside of the PBX. And then we create this route over to Office 365 and Microsoft Teams. This is fantastic, but it leaves you into a few different issues. One is, as you move all of your users to Teams, well, now I still have this dependency up here on the PBX and the voice gateway. I've actually not done anything other than created more work for myself or created more overhead, because I've now added this extra layer in here, and I'm still maintaining this upper layer here. That's number one. Number two, most organizations, what I find is that they're on legacy contracts with their PRI provider, their carrier, and they may be paying quite a bit for PRIs when they really just need SIP or to move towards something more modern. And so we have this big issue of, we've got this entire layer up here that's really just basically not required. And so the question is how do we solve for it? Because if I've done it like this, and I move all my users over here, I've still got my PBX and my voice gateway. How do I get rid of that? How do I get away from it? Because there might be a maintenance contract or something of that nature that we're looking to remove, or that may be providing all of our cost savings in order to be able to justify the move to Teams. Because even with our PBX, there's licensing, right? So as we move away from the PBX over to Teams, we want to shift that cost of the licensing away from the PBX and over to Teams. We don't want to just add to it. If we're just adding to the cost, we really aren't doing our jobs very well, as far as it goes. So what is the ultimate solution here? The ultimate solution, in my opinion, and what I'm hoping to be able to convince you of today, is to actually put the SBC in front. As we look at this, I'll just kind of highlight this here. Oops. Come on. There we go. I had like nice little animation here. So we really want to put the certified session border controller out in front of our PBXs. And by doing this, this SBC becomes what I like to call the Rosetta Stone. It solves a lot of problems because it can talk to our PBXs, it can talk to our voice gateways, it can talk to Teams, it talks to everything. Now, quick question. That the what I want to highlight here is with the certified session border controller, one of the things, this goes back to why I say check through what your SBC provider is certified for. I always try to recommend that people look at SBCs that are largely agnostic. So like I said, we've got folks like AnyNode and Audio Codes and Ribbon, folks like that who are truly agnostic SBCs. They're not tied to the manufacturers. Not that the manufacturers are trying not to be agnostic or anything, SIP is SIP, but what we find is those agnostic SBC manufacturers can tend to be out in front of trying to make sure that they talk to everybody first because they have to be, and things like that. So when we sit there and look at these certified session border controllers, the more agnostic that we can be within that, the better chance that we have of being able to talk to everything without any issues. So this becomes a key piece here. By entering this in, I can also bring in a SIP trunk. Now everything is just hub and spoke off of this SBC. And I have 5 reasons here I'm going to give you for why this hub and spoke model off of the certified SBC is going to make a big difference here for you. But now, like I said, now that you can see this, we're just taking individual connections and handling those as one-offs. I don't have to worry about if my PBX manufacturer will talk to Microsoft Teams. I don't have to worry about if Microsoft Teams will work with this voice gateway because I know I'm going back to this certified session border controller. So what I want to do now is I'm going to jump into, now that I've kind of set this up and said, this is my solution, is let's get the certified session border controller up in front. The real thing to think about is we're going to give you these 5 reasons, but the best way I always tell people, besides thinking about it as a Rosetta Stone, is this becomes the layer 3 for your voice network. So if you think about traditional networking, we have our router, it's our layer 3 device. This SBC really, it's more than that because it can actually do all the way up to layer 7 for us because the session border controller is a voice firewall. But if we just think about it as our routing engine, and this is where we're going to put our routes and everything and handle our routing, this makes a big difference. So as we move forward, 5 ways that putting the SBC in front simplifies the complex. Number 1 is routing. 2, we're going to talk about dial plans. What does that mean? We'll compare and contrast that. How do we handle analog integration? How do we do things like contact center? And then how do we handle reporting and extensibility within our environment and why that might matter for it? So these are just 5 reasons. I am sure that we could sit down and come up with lots more as we move forward, but let's take a look at this. So with routing, again, I mentioned this before, we're no longer dependent on the manufacturers to play well with each other. This is a big deal. I remember back deploying OCS Link and even Skype for Business, and we had to sit there and work through all the interoperability components. So many times, especially like with Cisco and things like that, we would sit there and try to do various routes to and from each other, and we had to be on very specific versions of Cisco. This was all the way back in Cisco 4.x for Call Manager. I mean, we're now on what, 11.5 or something like that. So this was just showing my age a little bit within this. But the big thing here is that we can start to utilize centralized routing. So as we think about it from the perspective of a smaller deployment, kind of like what we showed to begin with, if I think about just, hey, I'm inserting the certified session border controller in between my PBX and my carrier, and now I've got another connection off to Microsoft for over the internet. I can do all of my routing right here on the session border controller. That might be using LDAP, like using Active Directory based fields so that we can look that up and see if the teams versus not. And if they're not, it goes over to our Cisco or Avaya, Mitel, whatever we may have for our PBX. And if a certain field is filled out, hey, we're now going to route that over to Microsoft Phone System. This just in that, just LDAP routing could be a huge help. Whether I've worked with Cisco or Avaya, what I find is as we start to peel people off, even inside of that third-party PBX, I may have to create route patterns or update a routing table on a one-off basis if I'm not doing a massive block. So being able to control the routing at the SBC level can become a lot more flexible. In a larger deployment, like what we showed earlier, where we might have a call manager cluster in Europe, a call manager cluster in the US, maybe we even have another one over in the Asia Pacific area. At that point in time, we don't really want to sit there and have be doing all of our routing at all of the SBCs. That could actually get very complex very quickly and become very fraught with error, with human error, just as we're trying to maintain all of our different routes. At that point in time, we recommend, or I recommend, that we start looking at routing managers, whether that's something like AudioCode's routing manager, Ribbon has PSX, all the manufacturers for the most part, Oracle has their version. The routing manager, though, what that does is it allows us to have a central routing engine where that pushes out the routes to the SBCs. It can also, basically what we're doing is sending SIP signaling back to a routing engine, which then determines what route it should hit and then tells the SBC where to route that call. These can be global deployment because now you have a single pane of glass for all of your routes and you can start to take advantage of that. In addition, you can also start to utilize things like least cost routing or last tail hop off, things like that where allowed. Not every country allows for that, so you need to make sure that you're following local laws and things like that. But for countries and locations where we can use least cost routing, that can be a really great methodology. So for example, here in the US, we had, very commonly there, in the past, there was things like local and long distance. And so if somebody in LA that needed to call New York, we could actually have that call route out of New York instead of out of LA to avoid long distance charges and things of that nature. We do see that some with international calling, but again, follow your local laws for making sure that you're staying in the right side of that in the legal manner for everything. So routing becomes a big thing here, and routing really is going to determine, is going to be based largely off of this next piece, which is dial plans. Because my recommendation is to use E164, let's find a globally unique number for that, utilize globally unique numbers, then decide on the route. This makes everything happen at the routing engine layer much, much easier. And again, we can send all of that across, whether that's from our carrier or from a PBX or from Microsoft Teams into the SBC as an E164 number. We format it as such, then we route it back out to wherever it needs to go, and then we can handle all of our manipulations at each layer of the various components, whether that's at Teams. So as we bring a call into Teams, I can choose whether or not I need to keep it as an E164 number, or maybe I want to strip some digits or add some digits or manipulate some digits. Maybe I have a main line number that actually gets, so when that call comes into that main line, it actually changes over to a different number. I can handle that within Teams. Same thing at Call Manager or for Avaya or for Cisco. As that call comes in, we can strip digits, or I can even use the SBC. So I did my route, and then on my outbound to my legacy PBX, I can use the SBC to do number manipulation and stripping as we go along. So this can become a very critical component of our platform. In addition, now I'm not worrying about interop between how many digits does my Cisco need to see from Microsoft Teams, whereas if I have an Avaya, and it's very common for me to talk to customers who have multiple PBXs. By doing this, I can simplify that because I'm not trying to account for every PBX. I'm only accounting for what SBC needs to be, and then the SBC is accounting separately for what each PBX needs. So it really solves our dial plans quite nicely. All right, so that routing and dial plans were the first two. This next one, analog integration. I get asked this all the time of when I'm deploying Microsoft Teams, well, how do we handle our analog? That could be faxing, as much as we might joke that, faxing's not available here. And when somebody asks, where are you? You say, hey, I'm in 2020. Fax is still very, very prevalent across many industries. Whether that be manufacturing, delivery type stuff, even legal still will require a lot of faxing versus email signatures. So we still see a lot of faxing. I also see things like gate automation where people will roll up to a parking lot and need to go to a gate, and they'll push the button and somebody on the other end will key in at some DTMF codes that will then raise the gate, things of that nature. Or you might even be going into a lift and have that emergency phone that sits in the lift. And so how do we handle all of those? Today, Microsoft doesn't provide for any of that within phone system. There is no concept of analog inside a phone system. So what we can do with a certified session border controller is we can hang an ATA, whether that be like a media pack from audio codes, a traditional ATA, there's Grand Stream, there's tenors from Ribbon, there's Algo. I mean, there's lots of different ATAs out there that you can utilize. We can actually connect these back to our SBC. And if we're using something like SIP-Reg, we can actually even achieve dynamic registration or dynamic routing within our environment so that we can track where those phone numbers are and be able to route those calls appropriately. So whether it's coming from, maybe it's going to an analog phone system or an analog phone sitting in a parking lot booth, we can still call from Microsoft's Teams over through the SBC and have that route over to that analog phone over there. I will say this, I am actually really keen. If you didn't catch Eric's session just before this, he kind of mentioned a little bit with the 3-pip phones and everything, and mentioned about the fact that Microsoft is bringing a SIP gateway, and so standardized SIP phones will be able to register. It'll be really interesting to see if a ATA that can register via SIP will be able to register directly up to the phone system through that new SIP gateway, which then may be able to provide that analog support. But that would be for organizations that are in a pure Microsoft solution and don't have a certified session border controller. If you do have direct routing and you do have an SBC, my recommendation will still be to hang that ATA off of the SBC. All right. So this is going to be key. Like I said, this is probably where people feel like as they move towards Microsoft Teams, where most of their delays or feeling like it can't be done happens is right here. And my biggest point to folks is that it can be done. You just have to think through it a little bit more. And if you do have this SBC out in front, you're just creating the ATAs. Analog just becomes another spoke on that off of that hub, no different than your third-party PBX, whether that be Avaya or Call Manager. So if you kind of think about it from that mindset, and that we're just going to connect those ATAs over to that SBC, it really simplifies it. So for any other components of analog that might need to be out there, we can handle that. All right. So contact center here. This one's a little bit interesting because there's two different sides to this. First off is that most contact centers can route directly through the certified session border controller. So if I can connect this directly to that SBC, now I can choose whether or not I can basically choose whichever contact center I want. Now that might mean that my contact center agents may have to use that contact center's agent console. So that call might come through a different console. It might not come through Teams. It might not come through a handset. It might come through their own agent console, which is fine. We just have to be aware of that, but it allows you to choose the right contact center for your business. In addition, if you're looking at the first wave of certified contact centers with Microsoft Teams, many of them are using the direct routing methodology, even though the contact center is integrating with Teams. So when I look at my Teams client, I'm actually seeing the contact center agent console within the Teams client, but that call is actually being handled via direct routing underneath the hood, and it's being shifted off to the contact center before it goes over to Teams, and then the contact center itself is doing that redirection. Going back to my point of that, now I can choose the best contact center for myself. If, for example, I don't want a contact center that's certified or integrated with Teams yet, I could actually simply have that agent utilize the contact center's console, answer those calls there, and maybe they don't get a phone number actually on Teams. Maybe they just get Teams for IM and chat, and all of their contact goes through the contact center. So really critical here to just kind of think through things with the contact center, and obviously work through the contact center provider that you choose. Microsoft does keep a list out there of the current contact centers that are certified or going through the certification process with Microsoft Teams, whether that's using direct routing or the APIs. So lots of good stuff out there for that. All right. And I am tracking pretty good on time because I wanted to leave about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So, all right, so kind of heading into the home stretch here with extensibility and reporting. I didn't want to grab any screenshots from any particular vendor here, mainly because of the fact that all the vendors have their own offerings, plus there's some third parties out there. But one of the big key things is that I get asked a lot is, how do I know what's really happening to my calls? With Microsoft Teams today, we don't have any real-time reporting. All of that real-time, all of those reports, whether you go through call analytics, the call quality dashboard, they're all delayed anywhere from 5, 15, 30 minutes, just depends on how fast that data gets processed. And so people don't really have that real-time reporting that they might want. With a third-party SBC using direct routing, we can actually monitor calls at the SBC layer, and we can start to see real-time call quality. So I can start to see that at the call layer within the SBC. Now, I'm not getting any of my teams to Teams calls. So if me and my teammate are talking back and forth and we're on Teams, not going to see that here. But if I'm calling the PSTN, I am going to be able to see those calls. So any calls going in and out of the PSTN, and especially with customer service calls, things like that, if it's going through that SBC, I can start to see what that call quality is. Not only that, but I can see, am I seeing the call quality degrade on the carrier side? Am I seeing that call quality degrade on the connection to the PBX or to Microsoft Teams? I can start to see that at different layers. So this is really a big aspect here for being able to see all of that call quality and being able to see what we're doing. In addition, we get that ability to see for network planning. I can start to see, am I hitting 90% thresholds? Now, Microsoft, this is actually pretty awesome. In the Teams admin center, if you've got your SBC set up for direct routing, I can actually set in Teams how many concurrent calls are happening. So at the 90 percentile level, when I hit 90% of concurrent calls, so if I say I've got 100 channels for Teams, as soon as I hit 90 concurrent calls, I'm going to get an alert. That's fantastic. But that's not accounting for any analog devices that might be making a call to the PSTN through my SBC. It's not accounting for any other PBXs that might be sending calls through my SBC. So we really want to be able to watch for concurrent calls. And number one thing, and I actually already had this conversation this morning here in the US, was somebody asking, how do I know this? Where do I need to look in my legacy PBX to find how many concurrent calls over the past month or 2 months? What was my high water mark? Because as we start planning for teams, this is really what we're looking for, is how many concurrent calls have we had? So by being able to monitor that with the reporting layer, now I can see, and I can even set my threshold. So instead of like Microsoft saying you're only going to get alerted at 90%, maybe I care about being alerted at 80%. Maybe I know that if I get to 80% call volume, that I need to be able to burst, or maybe I need to call up my carrier and have them turn up my SIP trunk so that I can have multiple, or I can have more than 100 sessions. So we might have to look at those kinds of things within that. Some of the other cool stuff that I'm seeing out there within the SBC layer is the ability to start doing trend analysis, things like that. There's also different models from the various manufacturers of analytics where we're starting to get artificial intelligence built into these for monitoring and reporting. So it's really kind of key. Also, in addition, with going back to the routing layer, when we're starting to do this reporting and everything and monitoring through this centralized SBC layer, we can actually see if an SBC goes down and have it automatically do alternate routes. So think about it like you might do with OSPF or EIGRP for network routing. Now we can start to do different routing around trouble areas, or if we have a call, if we have a SBC that's having performance issues, how do I route around that so we don't get call degradation? So extensibility and reporting, really, really key for it's kind of like the cherry on top of using an SBC as the center of our voice deployment. All right, so as we kind of finish up, we talked about routing, dial plans, analog integration, contact center, and extensibility and reporting. These are the 5 key reasons why putting that SBC up in front of your voice deployment makes more sense than taking a back-end approach. And we didn't even really talk about it, but as you move, well, we kind of did early on, but the 6th reason that I will give you as kind of a bonus reason is if you put that SBC up in front, it allows you to decommission legacy PBXs easier as you move along, so that now you're not having to worry about how you replace things. So by putting that SBC up in front, as soon as you get all your users off of a PBX, you can decommission it. Now you're not having to go continue paying for the maintenance contracts and things like that. And so with that, I've left about 8 minutes here for questions. I believe there was at least one that I saw pop up in the chat for Thomas asked, what happens if you don't have a certified SBC? So that's a great question. I've heard in the past some of the SBC manufacturers, even before Microsoft certified them, that they were able to work with direct routing. The biggest thing that I would say is if it's not a certified SBC, there's no guarantee that you'll actually get it working with direct routing. The second thing is that you have no idea if Microsoft might change something that will impact and all of a sudden you're down. So from a direct routing standpoint, highly recommended stay with the certified SBC manufacturers. Microsoft knows that their code will work with Microsoft's solution, and that there's not going to be something that happens on either side that's going to completely break that direct routing connection. And at that point in time, your entire phone system might be down, and you don't want that. Seems like a very big resume generating event. If all of a sudden you used a non-certified SBC, something gets changed out there, and your phone system is down, and you have no recourse at that point in time. If you want to come off mute and ask a question, feel free. Happy to take some questions. or you can put them into the chat window as well. Well, I'll stick around. If there's no questions now, I'll just stick around for a few more minutes. We've got about 5 or so more minutes left in the session, but want to let people get on with their day. Really appreciate you joining us today. Hopefully this kind of gave some insight to things that you might want to think about for your deployment of your voice systems. And as you move forward, how does this look like so that you can achieve a more flexible solution while also simplifying what can get very complex very, very quickly. Really appreciate it, and thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Adam. Hopefully, I'll keep an eye on the chat just in case anyone does have any questions. But yeah, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I'll stick around here as well.
Perfect.
Oh, and I guess, Lee, the one thing I didn't do is I'm supposed to ask everybody to rate the session beforehand.
Yes, good point.
I'm sitting here looking at this. So if you had a fun time, please go and rate the session. We do look for feedback and really appreciate any feedback that you can give us. We do have the keynote coming up here at 1900, and really please continue to show the love out on Twitter using the Teams Fest hashtag. We've very much been appreciative to be able to be involved in this, and really want to thank all of the hosts, Chris and Adam and Visa. Just been a fantastic experience. So thank you.
Perfect. Okay. We're good, but we'll hold on until the 22 just in case anyone has a question they want to get out.
Absolutely. Those are some great keynotes. I just saw the keynotes you posted up here, and some great people talking.
Absolutely. We had Jeff Tiefer at the start of the event.
Yeah, that was a little. So that was a little early for me.
Yeah. It was early for me. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning.
I think that was about 2 a.m. for me.
Yeah. But I think it's recorded anyway, so you can probably get a copy.
Absolutely. And I think everything here, Lee, from what I know, is going to be posted up on YouTube afterwards. So
correct. Yeah, I don't think we've got an exact
time frame, but
it's probably within the next week, I would guess.
Yeah, because there's a lot of great sessions. I saw a lot of folks that even just during this time slot, I was like, oh man, I would have loved to gone and seen a few of those folks speak as well.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we'll call it there, Adam. I think
All right.
everyone's asked their questions, and appreciate your time and creating the session. And yeah, thanks for everyone that was joining. And we'll have another session in about 20 minutes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it.
Always. Thanks, everyone.